Our next speaker is Ms. Ayse Hortacsu, and she will be addressing, again, the Nepal earthquake, a case study strengthening building code implementation and compliance in developing countries. She is the Director of Projects at the Applied Technology Council, ATC, a nonprofit corporation headquartered in Redwood City, Northern California. She has more than 10 years of experience as a structural engineer and a project manager. Ayse is currently the project manager for numerous seismic hazard mitigation projects funded by FEMA, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the City of San Francisco's Earthquake Safety Implementation Program, ESIP. She recently managed a project that developed an adaptation of the ATC 20-1 field manual, post-earthquake safety evaluation of buildings for the country of Bhutan. Next door to Nepal there, considering the country's cultural and political context. Ayse is a member of the 2014 Hausner Fellows Program of the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute, EERI. She's also a founding member of the Women in Structural Engineering, WIC network, connecting women in the profession. Ayse has a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science degrees in Structural Engineering from Stanford University, a fellow alumni, Dr. Amod. She is originally from Istanbul, Turkey, and currently resides in San Francisco. So help me welcome Ms. Ayse Hortacsu.
Thank you. First of all, I think there's going to be a lot of overlap between Amod's presentation and mine, so hopefully we can catch you up on the schedule a little bit. Alberto, we're going to be flipping through very fast. As mentioned, I'm with the Applied Technology Council, which is a nonprofit organization, again, dedicated to developing engineering resources that are state-of-the-art for hazard mitigation. But however, today I'm here as a longtime member of the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute. EERI is a global membership organization. It's a technical resource organization and has about 3,000 members around the world, so I hope that most of you in the room are aware of it or members of this organization. I have a two-part presentation. So the first part will be a very quick overview of the findings from EERI's reconnaissance team that traveled to Nepal following the earthquake and the recommendations they developed regarding building codes. And then I'll close briefly with an ongoing project, again under the umbrella of EERI, as I'm part of the Hausner Fellows. So part one, EERI's response to the 2015 Nepal earthquake. So again, for the last 50 years or so, EERI has been sending reconnaissance teams to countries where big earthquakes happen. But before those teams are even dispatched, the first thing that EERI establishes is a virtual clearinghouse. This is a very, very useful tool, and they even established one after the Chile earthquake that happened 2 weeks ago. So this is a depository of information. People post questions, people post the photos or the research papers they find, and it remains open for a long time. So if you want to find any background information, that will be a really good resource for you. And then once the clearinghouse is established and the EERI, assuming the board of directors decides that it's the right thing to do, they establish a team called the Learning from Earthquakes Initiative. It's the LFE team, mostly funded by the National Science Foundation, to travel to the country with certain objectives and bring back information that we can learn from. In this picture, you can see most of the people that were involved. Again, I'm not in that picture. I was not part of the team, but three of my fellow Hausner Fellows, one of which works for Amod, were part of the team. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about their strategic objectives. But these 13 people traveled to Nepal a month after the earthquake. We can go to more. And they spent about a week in Nepal at the end of May and the beginning of June. Next slide, please. So this is a close-up picture of Nepal, and the big star is the Gorkha epicenter, and the little blue dots are all the places they took pictures in. So this group, the 13 people in a week, took about 11,000 photos. So there's a summer intern somewhere in a back room going through all of those photos, and once they're completed, they will be all posted to the EERI virtual clearinghouse. Of course, the team wanted to come back and summarize their findings, and I understand that they are developing a series of papers that will be published on this subject. But in order to get the information out quickly, what they did is they recorded a series of webinars. So each of the 13 members of the team, and the team leader, Brett Lasagna, got to go twice. They recorded webinars that are now posted on the EURI website. And as you can see, the subjects really range from things you would expect, what happened to the buildings, to how was the psychological factors, and how did the hospitals do. So there's a lot of depth in these presentations. Each of these presentations are at most 30 minutes long, so I invite every one of you to listen to these. Again, they're one by one for each subject, so you could select the one that you're interested in and watch it. And you can also download the PDFs. So the next part of my presentation will be basically webinar number 11. So if you want to hear a little more detail, you can hear it being given by the original author of it, John Bevington. Again, John is a Hauser Fellow. And I don't have to explain to this room why building codes are important and why the team decided to take a close look at it. But before they got there, they did their research. They found a report written by Dr. Ahmad that said exactly what he said a minute ago, that most of the buildings in Kathmandu Valley, and this is the most urban part of the country, 80% of these buildings are not professionally engineered. And then in the rural parts, the percentage is even higher of buildings that are not engineered. And when the team was out there, they were able to see this firsthand. So this is the most prevalent building type that they saw in Kathmandu Valley. This is a reinforced concrete frame with masonry infill. These are apartments that people live in. They might have their businesses on the first floor. And again, these were not designed by engineers. So what does that mean? They did not have seismic detailing. They didn't have appropriate foundations. They were not, geotechnical issues were not considered. There were severe geometric irregularities because the person on the top floor just wanted to have more floor space, so the building just expands as they go up the building. There was pounding and also improper workmanship and materials. But again, we just heard, Nepal does have a building code. And at the time of the earthquake, and the revision was even in place. And the next slide will show these are the parts that Ahmad spoke about a minute ago. And again, our RC frame buildings that I showed with all that damage belong to part 3, mandatory rules of thumb. And if you thumb through these mandatory rules of thumb, the rules are actually there. They actually do say you should have 135-degree hooks. But the buildings that the team looked at had 90-degree hooks. So again, just because the code is there does not mean that they were followed. That said, there are other improvements that could be made to the building code as it exists. So the team had some recommendations. For new buildings, a risk-targeted approach would benefit from, in this code. Geotechnical issues that are currently not considered should be included, and I believe that's already on the list. One item is disabled access is not already considered. And also for existing buildings, there are so many existing buildings, but there isn't any guidance available right now on how to retrofit them. And it doesn't stop there. Following the earthquake, how do you decide on what to demolish or how to demolish it, and how do you make safe egress paths? So these are all considerations that should be considered for inclusion in the revised code. So as we talked about a little bit before, code implementation was found to be very limited. So only about 7% of the municipalities were declaring that they were following the code. And even within a municipality, there is a big difference. If you have a public building, you're more likely to adhere to the building codes, but if you're a private building, you may not. So for example, the private schools were found to be not code compliant at all. And there's also a big difference between urban and rural areas. In an urban area, people are more likely to follow the code, where in the rural areas, people figured out a loophole that they don't even have to do this. So that should be one of the things that needs to be fixed. And of course, there's a lack of engineering knowledge and advice on the field. Now I'll show a few pictures just to drive the points across. This is the Horizon Parkview complex. It's 213 apartments. It's 5 buildings that have 17 floors each. But the permit was issued for 12 stories only. So as you can imagine, those top 5 floors did not do so well, and it was red tagged when the team was there. I don't know if they've demolished them or nothing. Okay. Their Facebook page is still up, and people are smiling. This is a picture from a school that the group visited. Again, this should have been designed with the mandatory rules of thumb, or maybe even a step higher, with those 135-degree hooks. But you can see that the spacing of the rebar is too far apart, and the hooks are not there. So, and this detail that the team saw was what was typical on the field. And here's a last picture from a rural village. By the time the team got there, all they saw was this 2-story building. But before the earthquake, it used to be 5 stories tall. Again, the homeowner had a permit for 2, decided to build up 3 more stories. And after the earthquake, when she had partial collapse, she, out of her own pocket, paid to get this building demolished. So, big consequences for the owners. So again, there could be many improvements made to the building code. Occupancy should be considered. The current code does not distinguish between schools or hospitals or warehouses. It's much more by square footage. And post-earthquake usability should be considered. Again, there were many positives observed, and these 2 slides have NSET's name all over them. So again, with participation from NSET, there have been efforts to teach masons to how to build buildings more properly, and that is an effort that should continue. And the school retrofit, which is on the next slide, is the project that Ahmed mentioned. That's also incredible. I mean, all the buildings that were retrofitted were not damaged. So let's just do them. Let's do them all to the thousands of schools that they have. As Fred and Thomas mentioned earlier, with each disaster comes an opportunity. So this is the time that people are paying attention to it. That lady that had to demolish the top 3 floors of her own house, she actually told our team that her goal is that generations to come, her family will know that this building should not be any taller than 2 stories. So this is one person, but she lived through it, so she's paying attention to seismic hazards. So we should strike while the iron's hot. Again, in summary, there are building codes in Nepal, but the adoption and compliance rates are really low. There are potential areas for technical improvement, but again, compliance and implementation are key. Oh, here. So again, if you would like to hear more detail about this project, and there's, again, more information beyond building codes about the Nepal earthquake on the ERI website, so I'll invite you to all view them. I'll switch over to the next part of my presentation, which is the ERI Hausner Fellows Project. This is the ERI's leadership program, so they are looking to train future leaders for seismic hazard mitigation, and we are the 2nd class, and we were initiated in July of 2014. There are 8 of us in this class, and we are from all over the world. So among the 8 of us, we have the 5 structural engineers, which is totally expected on a project like this. And then we have what's next? We have an architect, so we're getting along with the architect. Well, it's 5-1, so I think we're going to win, but, and then we have a GIS specialist, which, in this data-driven day and age is very helpful, and he's from London, so it's a very interesting perspective that he brings to our team. And we even have a real doctor. So we have a medical doctor from the Caribbean. So we have a very diverse list of interests, and our faculty advisor is a business professor. So again, they're teaching us to be less engineering-y, but more leader. So it's been a very valuable process. And the process has been, they literally locked us up in a room for 1 week in Alaska and said, you leader wannabes, come up with what you think is the most important thing. You know, how are you gonna fix these disasters? How are you gonna stop people from dying? And we, independent from ICC and the Global Forum, came up with building code compliance. So we are looking at, our project title is Strengthening Building Code Compliance in Developing Countries. So what we're trying to do is at this point, we are doing a lot of literature review. Fred Krimgold's been very helpful to us. We're doing a lot of literature review to understand the best practices for building code enforcement or building code compliance, understanding what works and what doesn't. And then we're going to develop a survey so that we can open it up to the global membership of ERI and hopefully further with your help to collect more information from your municipalities on what has worked and what hasn't worked. And then all of this information, we're going to take it to Nepal. We're planning a trip in February 2016 at Amod's house. We will go and look at, we're planning on meeting with 3 municipalities there and talking to them in person, knowing what we learn knowing what we learn from our research, hearing what they need, and try to come up with real, tangible solutions for that municipality. So again, these will be our case study that will apply to Nepal, but our hope is that these municipalities will take the tools we give them and actually can implement them, and other municipalities can follow in suit. That's all I have. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much for sharing that case study, and look forward to your next visit to Nepal and hopefully a report that we can share with our congregation. And once again, we will put these presentations on the web. It's being taped, so we'll have a chance to look at it and show it to your colleagues. So there's a larger audience than this room here.